Welcome to Paddlecast with Betsy
and Billy. On Paddlecast, we talk to and about paddlers who are pushing limits. Paddlers who are pushing their own limits and pushing the limits of paddle sports.
In this week's news, we are going to start with a review of the Sprint Canoe and Paracanoe European Championships from last weekend that were held in Racice, Czechia.
We'll share updates on Sebastian Szubski doing his record attempt for fastest circumnavigation of Britain by kayak.
We'll talk about the last two Tour SUP events this season, which is Nordhausen and Namur, and also about the Crossing for CF, which is the largest paddling fundraiser in the world that happened last weekend.
Finally, we'll take you to marathon with the Berg River Marathon in South Africa and the Yukon River Quest, which has just started. And then a couple of final tidbits, which we're going to call the warm down.
So, Sprint European Championships, there was some really good racing here. The conditions were pretty hot and mostly glassy calm. And it was so hot that some of the racers jumped into the lake after their events, which was really fun. And just nice to see like that level of fun and joy happening at something as sort of serious as Europeans. And because the conditions were so good too, we also had a pretty good number of European best times that were set. There were a number of, I think, wins that were more expected, but there was also almost a surprising number of sort of upsets that we saw, which made it pretty exciting. The one of the bigger upsets was in the men's K4 race. So normally we see the men's K4 pretty thoroughly dominated by Germany and Hungary. And that's, what we've mostly seen over the World Cups as well. That battle between sort of Germany, Hungary, Germany. Not what we saw this weekend in Racice. It was the Portuguese men's K4 who came out on top, which was incredibly exciting for them. Portugal actually didn't even qualify a men's K4 for the Olympics last year in Paris. And these four guys are all really experienced racers. They've got some really impressive results. So it's Gustavo Goncalves, Joao Ribeiro, Messias Baptista, Pedro Casinha. That was the Portuguese men's crew. They won by 0.2 seconds. So, the K4 racing 500 meters, it's always really tight at this level. But that's actually it's a pretty clear win for them.
Yeah, it's a decent win, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And this combination, I think it is a new combination for Portugal. So again, these guys are pretty experienced. It's not like they are new to this, but I think the four of them together in this combo is new. They were so thrilled with their win. There's some amazing photos of these guys celebrating afterwards. So really big deal, really exciting for Portugal. And definitely good news for them heading into the next Olympic cycle, especially after the disappointment of missing out in Paris. Czechia finished second, so silver medal on home turf, which was really nice for them, and another bit of a surprise in that men's K4 race. And Germany ended up actually tied for fourth. So we talked about the German crew I think a few weeks ago after the World Cups. So they have swapped Tom Liebscher-Lutz for Anton Winkelmann. There's a really good interview with Max Lemke and Jacob Schopf after they won gold in their K2 race, which they were, of course, happy with. Again, that's exactly who we expect to win gold in K2. That's what they do. And the commentators were asking them, is this sort of like redemption from the K4? And the guys were like, no, because it's not, the K4 is new. And so they don't necessarily have those expectations to win yet. They're still in the learning phase of putting that boat together. And I think the guy said something on Instagram as well about it, just that they're in the learning phase. So they're not, they don't seem too concerned about, coming in fourth as long as they're learning from their racing at this point. So never count out the Germans. It's likely we'll see this crew on the podium in a few weeks at World Championships, and definitely don't count them out for the next Olympic cycle.
Yeah, that would be foolish.
Yeah, But it'd be good to have Portugal in the mix too for this rivalry, so it's not just sort of Germany-Hungary.
This Portuguese crew have come together and they've won. They've managed to make it work, and then you're giving the Germans so much time, extra time. Oh, they'll get there eventually. It's a process, and it's like, well, for the Portuguese, it wasn't a process. It was a done win.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. But the Portuguese they've only won this race once. Their results at the World Cups were nowhere near as impressive. So
No,
it's a lot harder to repeat this kind of thing, versus I think the Germans we've seen
it
much
is.
closer
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the top more consistently.
yeah. No, the German K4 is very consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've replaced one person from last year's Olympics. They train together all the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they are feeling the pressure as much as they say that they are intentionally in a learning phase.
I watched the heats of the men's K1000, but I didn't manage to catch the final. So what happened?
So we saw another Portuguese win here, Fernando Pimenta, back on top. He won pretty decisively. Really exciting for him. Obviously, Pimenta is, he was probably the favorite, one of the favorites going into this. I probably would have bet on Balint Kopas of Hungary just because of his results at the World Cup so far this season and at the Olympics over Pimenta. So a little bit surprising to see Pimenta kind of demolish the field really in the final. Started ahead, finished ahead. At the end, it looked like everyone tried to do a pickup at the finish and try to catch him, and just they couldn't catch him. He was able to hold it. He didn't die. He pushed all the way through and took the win. The finish between second through fourth position was all a photo finish, which was kind of insanely tight and also emphasizes just how well Pimenta did to win so clearly. And this is, just a couple of weeks coming after his 2 gold medals at the Marathon Europeans. So swapping from those 20, 30K races down to 1,000-meter sprints within 2 weeks and getting more European gold medals, really impressive. And I think he's really, really thrilled with the result, especially I think he had a little bit of a disappointing Olympics last year, coming in towards the bottom of the A final. So he's on top of the world, feels like he's back where he wants to be. A little bit surprising to see Balint Kopas finish in third place. So still on the podium. He's such a strong paddler, multiple Olympic medalist, has had some great World Cups this season and finished in third. The surprise was Martin Nathell from Sweden, who took the silver medal. He is a really solid, strong paddler, but he's not a name who we think about as being a typical podium name in the men's K1000. He's definitely sort of an A final name, but not necessarily, a silver medal behind Pimenta and ahead of Kopas. So really, really exciting for Nathell of Sweden. The margin was absolutely tiny. Again, photo finish between second through fourth. And it was Joseph Dostal who missed out on the podium. He came in fourth in front of the home crowd in Czechia. I probably would have bet between him and Kopas maybe to win, and especially with the home crowd. But I think we know that Dostal has he and Anna Polidova are right about to have their first child together. He took a little bit of time off after last year. I think he has said that this is a bit more of a sort of rebuilding type year for him. So I don't expect he's too upset by this result. But yeah, definitely a really exciting race to watch.
That's really cool that in the last, 10 days, that Pimenta has gold, 1,000, 3.6K, 5K, spoiler alert there, and 30K. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you're right. It is very impressive. It reminds me of Sifan Hassan, the Dutch runner who won multiple like very different running distances at the Olympics. So 5K, 10K, marathon, and anyone who's able to kind of do that it's pretty rare. Part of why Pimenta doing that is a big deal.
Yeah, it's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Although arguably, yeah, I think you could argue that it's easier to win 1,000 meters in a marathon versus 1,000 meters in a 200 meters.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think there'd be many people that can do that crossover.
Which is one of the kind of interesting features of some of the Olympic distances, and just the fact that the K1 men's Olympic distance is 1,000 meters and there is no 200 anymore.
It would be, if you're going to keep with your running comparisons, it would be like a 400-meter runner also trying to win the mile, which you don't often get that. You don't get that crossover, I don't think, very much.
Yeah, it's tough. There was a couple of young athletes who stood out who I did want to mention just so that everyone starts keeping an eye on them. The first was Alex Graneri of Spain, who finished second in the 500 meter behind Adam Varga. So Adam Varga of Hungary was racing the 500 meter, while Balint Kopás took the 1,000 meter slot, only one slot per country. So Alex Graneri was also racing the 500 in the K4 and in the K1. He's only 22 years old, and he finished silver in that 500 ahead of Joseph Dostal. So Dostal made it onto the podium in the 500, which is great in front of the home crowd, kind of making up for coming fourth in the 1,000. But yeah, really impressive from Alex Graneri of Spain, 22 years old. Obviously, that's the 500 meter. So not the 1,000 meter Olympic distance, but I'd say keep an eye on him. And that K4 race that he was in with Spain, they finished tied fourth with Germany. So yeah, strong crew as well. The other young standout is Lucrezia Zironi from Italy, who's only 23, and she finished fourth in the women's K1 500 meters, which for the women is the Olympic distance, that 500 meter. She also finished fifth in the K1 200 meters. And she has massively improved on her times from last year. At the under 23 Worlds, she won the B final in 156.6. And now she's come fourth in the K1 500 meters behind some of the fastest women in the world, Zsoka Csikos, Anna Pulawska, Melissa Novakovic, and her time. Obviously, the course conditions were very likely a bit faster, but 150.1, so 6 seconds faster than her time at the under 23 Worlds last year. So definitely keep an eye on Zironi as well.
Betsy, tell me about the women's K1.
So Zsoka Csikos of Hungary is having just like the most incredible year. She had a couple of really good World Cups, particularly in the 1,000 meters. And what she has done now is double gold in Racice in the 1,000 meter and 500 meter races. Actually, I should say triple gold because we haven't talked about the 5K yet, but she also won the 5K. Yeah, so Zsoka Csikos won everything she did last weekend. Incredibly impressive from Hungary. Hungary has such depth amongst their racers, and it's really hard to even get that slot to qualify to race for Hungary because of how competitive it is. And Csikos is just doing phenomenally well. Yeah, I can't wait to see what she does next. Can't wait to see how she does at the World Championships. She will have to face off against tougher competition there, with it being, world level rather than Europeans. I think Amy Fisher is definitely going to be some of her biggest competition. We will see who else can challenge them. And Anna Pulawska, another one who's been having a standout season. Anna Pulawska of Poland. She also races K2. She won gold in the K2 race with her partner, silver in the K1 500 meters. So she's still doing great. I think both Pulawska and Chicos are athletes who we weren't really talking about. I mean, Pulawska in the K2, yes, but not in the K1 last year or very much in the previous Olympic cycle. And now they are right up at the top. So pretty exciting developments there. So yeah, in the 500, Chicos, Pulawska of Poland, Novakovic of Serbia, Melissa Novakovic was the defending champ. So she went from gold last year to bronze this year. Lucrezia Zironi in fourth, and then Selma Koning of the Netherlands in fifth, who we talked about is getting coached by Sebastian Szubski's father in the Netherlands, who's doing a big push to kind of bring up the level of that team. So not quite as good as Koning's result in Poland a few weeks ago, but still a really strong result from her. And so she could be another one to look out for in this Olympic cycle too.
So there was a really cool race that I've not seen before, the mixed C4. Now, that's I'm guessing that's a non-Olympic distance, a non-Olympic class. But if you look at the way athletics has gone, they have mixed relays. So I wonder if mixed crew boat racing is something that we might see more of in the future.
I think we might. Yeah, I have heard that it could be being discussed, potentially at the Olympic level. We've seen that here at Europeans. They've done some mixed gender events at other very elite level events. I think they're really fun. Watching this mixed C4 race was just, really great fun. I think it's even more interesting because women weren't allowed to race in canoes for so long, and it only became an Olympic event in Tokyo 2020 or 2021 was when we finally had women's canoeing at the Olympics. That sort of event or discipline in the sport is historically slightly less developed than the men's side. And so I think it's kind of a cool moment to see actually women's canoeing is at a level now where some of the best women's canoeists in Europe are hopping in with some of the best men's canoeists in Europe in these C4s. And frankly, it looked fantastic. It was good. It was really, really high level. The times were really fast. The winning crew was the Spaniards, and they finished in 1:36 for a 500 meter.
Yeah, it's pretty rapid, isn't it?
Yeah. You end up with kind of like these interesting questions about like this is and there's no C4 in the Olympics for the last few Olympics, I think, which is too bad because it's a really cool boat and really fun. And I think making it mixed too, like because you might be more likely to have variety in sort of height or size. You kind of left with like, okay, well, who should be doing the steering? Who should be doing the stroking? How are people setting up their boats? The Spanish team that won had the two women, which was Maria Corbera and Angels Moreno. They were actually both on the same side. So the boat had three, I think it was three on the left and one on the right. Yeah, because with the canoeing and especially being single-sided, you're always thinking about, how you balance the boat, not just with sort of like weight, but strength, stroke style. It's very, very tactical and strategic, and there's a lot that goes into it. So really fun race to watch. I would definitely recommend, anyone with a few minutes, go watch that mixed C4 race. It was really quick, really fun. I hope to see it again at more events.
Yeah, that's cool.
And speaking of the canoeing, we had some really good tight racing in both the men's and women's C1 races. So a bit of a surprise in the men's C1000. I was totally betting on Martin Fuchse to win this. He's won the last few races he's done. He's on home turf in Czechia. And it was Catalin Chirilla of Romania who took the lead pretty early in the race. By kind of like the middle of the race, he had a pretty solid lead. I want to say like maybe half a boat length, maybe a little bit more. It's 1,000 meters. It's a long race, right? And Fuchse then, started making his move towards the finish, and he just didn't quite catch Cirilla. And it was so close. I think Fuchs had the momentum, and he actually thought he had caught him, because he looked after the race like, he had number one in the air, and it looked like he thought he caught him. Cirilla thought that he had been caught. Like, you could see on his face, he's looking around like, ooh, was it silver? But Cirilla took the gold, Fuchs took the silver. It was exciting.
Yeah, 500ths of a second is not much. That really is close.
Yeah. So that was kind of wild. And then the women's C1 200 was also fairly, not quite that tight, but fairly tight. We saw Dorota Borowska of Poland defend her title from last year. Great for her. She's a really strong, experienced canoeist, followed by Ludmila Luzon of Ukraine and Viktoriia Yarchevska from Spain. Yarchevska, we talked about her as a standout when she won the gold in the C1 200 meters in Szeged a few weeks ago. And I think, and then she didn't race in Poznan. And now she's racing again here at Europeans. She's still really young. I think she's 20 years old. And she's really proved that she is someone to watch out for, finishing in bronze behind two such, experienced and multi-podium and Olympic paddlers as Dorota Borowska and Ludmila Luzon. Really impressive. And then in the C2 race with Ángels Moreno, who had also done the C4 mixed race we just mentioned, they won, I believe, Spain's first gold medal in women's C2 and set a new European best time in the women's C2 of 1:55.543. So pretty exciting for Viktoriia Yarchevska. Definitely keep your eye on her.
Our favorite races, the 5Ks. It was so cool to get a message from you going, this is what 5K racing should look like.
Yeah, I had a surprisingly intense reaction watching the 5Ks after we had talked about, the 5Ks at the World Cups, where they've thrown all these extra portages in that are just not really part of sprint racing, that the sprint boats and sprint paddlers are frequently not really, focused on or prepared for. And to see the Europeans here, regular, old, on the water, portage free, 5K racing, it was so good. It was so good.
Do we know if this was a decision that was sort of made a long time ago, or was it because they looked at the World Cups and thought it didn't work? Or
my understanding is that the European Canoe Association operates separately from the ICF, the International Canoe Federation, soon to be renamed Paddle Worldwide. And so I think the European Federation just, essentially they're sort of free to do what they want to. The ICF will issue guidelines about how they might want a 5K to run, but they're not the ones who are running this event. The ECA could do whatever they wanted to, and made that call. It was so good to watch. And also just seeing, and of course the portages have only been introduced by the ICF at the world events in I want to say maybe like the last 2 or 3 years. So they're still relatively recent. Yeah, just the level was higher. We saw loads of top names, the people who are on the podiums in the Olympic distances were racing the 5Ks, which is not really what we saw as much of at the World Cups. I mean, yes, it's true for maybe a couple of people, but not most of them. So yeah, this was great. We had in the women's race, Csikos raced it. Melina Andersson from Sweden raced it.
Sletjo was there.
Yes. Yeah, who we just saw have an outstanding performance at the Marathon Europeans a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Susanna Ciccoli, big names.
Yeah, just really good to watch. And then some of those, of course, come from the marathon background. It really super tactical. Csikos pretty much dominated the race, kind of as we would expect based on her performance so far. And because she is really good in the 1,000 too. Like she's more of because the women's race is the 500 distance, you might see some paddlers who are kind of coming from the 1,000 to the 500 versus like the 200 to the 500. She's definitely more of the like longer distance to shorter distance, versus say like Pulawska, I think is stronger in the more of a like shorter distance, does better in the 200 and in the 500. Molina Anderson coming off of, I think like 2 or 3 weeks of illness, like pretty significant. She missed out on the Marathon Europeans, which was really disappointing because we were really looking forward to seeing her face off against Vonta Kisley and Anna Sletsko now, right? Which hopefully we'll see at Worlds. But yeah, great racing between Anderson and Csikos in particular, and Susanna Chikoli, pretty tight. But yeah, definitely Csikos dominated the women's race.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you take away the features of the portage, the racing obviously gets that much closer because there just isn't anything to break them up. But, you certainly bring in the 1,000-meter paddlers over the marathon paddlers. And it sort of went the same in the men's, didn't it?
Yeah, the men's race was another really good one. And again, like thinking about sort of the level of the paddlers racing the men's. So we had Fernando Pimenta, who had just won the 1,000-meter K1 race, Adam Varga, Mads Pedersen, your favorite, Martin Nathell,
Dostal was up there, wasn't he? Yeah.
Silver. Dostal was there, John Vold, really top-level guys in that.
Yeah, it does. It just changes the dynamic, doesn't it? And you see that while Mads rules a short course marathon and the marathon distance, if you take away the portages, he just doesn't quite have that top end speed that really separates you and allows you to win that 5K race with no portages.
Yeah, absolutely. This one was pretty tight all the way to the finish. And yeah, it looks like, Pimenta started making that sprint finish, and Varga was, he was sort of in the center. Varga was on his left, and Pedersen was on the right. And you could see Varga like really trying to kind of like, catch Pimenta's wave and get a little boost up to try and beat him. He put in a really good sprint and just couldn't quite stick with him, but he was really close. And yeah, Pedersen also, like, you just see him try to get the speed up, and it just didn't quite go as high as Pimenta, who clearly had enough in the tank at the end still to pull that off. No doubt in part just because of his marathon chops.
Yeah.
Really fun though. Definitely go watch those 5Ks. And at the same time as the Europeans, there was also a sprint race happening in Aranzo, Italy. Interestingly, the South Africans went out to that race. So Hamish Lovemore, Yuli Hart, and Esty Olivier were there with some other members of the South African team. And those three pretty much cleaned up, especially Hamish Lovemore, who we've talked about as having an exceptional season. But of course, all of the sort of top level Europeans were pretty much at the European Sprint Champs. But it looked like beautiful scenery. So, and of course, high level racing with that caliber of paddlers there. Let's move on to Sebastian Szubski's circumnavigation of Britain. How is he looking, Billy?
Yeah, Seb's flying. He said last week that he wanted to be doing 100K a day, and on many days he is doing that. He would have done that on Saturday, but he got cut short because of forecast of lightning, and which actually, like, I've been looking at the weather for just to see, what Seb could sort of be doing, and I didn't check for lightning, and it was interesting that I messaged you being like, I saw something on Facebook warning of lightning, and I didn't even connect the dots. I didn't even think, oh yeah, that's I just ignored it. But yeah, it had to do half a day on Saturday, which was bad luck. He had a tough time of it on Sunday because very strong side wind. What did he say he was paddling in? 60k gusts.
I can't remember which day it was, but it might have been Monday. One of the days he said he was about to go out into 60 kilometers an hour wind.
Yeah,
I'm sure that was gusting up to it. But he did say that was the most that he had ever paddled in. And I mean, 60K gusts, like that's
I've not paddled
I've
not paddled in that. No. There were a couple. There was one. I went to Waterlands a few years ago, and 9 years ago, I'm talking about now. And it was so gusty that at times I was trying to put my blade in, and my arm was being swung across the boat, and I was nearly putting it in on the wrong side. I mean, that must have been the case for Seb. It must have been awful.
Yeah.
But the wind on the Monday, he turned a little bit more east due to the coastline kicking out, and so it was still on the side, but it was that little bit more behind him on his rear quarter. And of course, it is an offshore breeze, so he's not having to battle big waves like Mike Lambert did on this section of coastline. Dougal battled into headwinds when he was going down this section. So yeah, whilst I did say, it's the easier section, no one's had a nice time of it, have they? But it is easy beaches to land on.
Yeah. It doesn't have as much features, right? I think we did mention that. Yeah. And there's not as many things that will stop you outright. Obviously, the lightning storm was one of those, totally unexpected, but otherwise not so much in terms of like, I think the fact that Sebastian has been able to still put in really high volume days, even with such difficult conditions, definitely a good sign for him. But also, one of those things that you can do along this East Coast that, maybe coming up the West Coast might not be quite the same situation.
No, there's plenty to stop you on the West Coast, isn't there? But in theory, the prevailing winds will be behind him, so it shouldn't be as tough in that sense.
Yeah. And looking at those numbers again, so, we've been kind of keeping track of how Sebastian is doing relative to Dougal's numbers and averages in his record, of course, the 40-day record. So that Dougal's average was 78 kilometers a day and 9.5 hours in the boat per day. So as of Sebastian's 12th day, he has increased his average to 83 kilometers per day and nearly 11 hours a day in the boat. So his average time in the boat per day right now is 10 hours and 53 minutes, which is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, so far, right, he is on average, if he keeps up the same averages or increases them, looking like he can break the record. But yeah, obviously that final time depends on the location, the conditions. And Billy, you were looking into how fast Dougal ran this specific section down the East Coast. How does Sebastian's times on this section compare to Dougal's times and distances on the same section of coast?
Yeah, so Dougal started his day 24 in a very similar position to where Sebastian started his trip. And it took Dougal 14 days to do what Sebastian has done in 13 days. They're about a day apart. It's starting to get a relatively fair comparison because they've covered a fair distance. So I'm happy with that comparison. I know that in the following 5 days, so what would that be? Days 36 to 40 for Dougal, where he finished his trip, he really flew. And actually then if you continue round day 1 and 2 of Dougal's trip, he averaged 94 kilometers a day on those 5 or 6 days. So, Sebastian is going to have to keep that going. I know that he's having a slightly shorter day today. He's just going to do 54 kilometers and set himself up for a big crossing over to Norfolk across the Wash in quite favorable conditions tomorrow on Wednesday. So it will be very interesting. Sebastian's going to have to creep round the East Anglian coast in sort of in not perfect conditions. And then he's going to have to try and cross the Thames estuary. And looking at the forecast, I don't know whether he's going to be able to do such a massive crossing. Dougal did Aldborough to Margate. And I can't remember what Mike did. Mike did a pretty big crossing of the Thames estuary as well. I don't know if Sebastian's going to be able to do that. I think he's going to have to creep more round to sort of maybe the Clacton-on-Sea area and do a slightly smaller crossing.
Just because of the conditions.
Just because of conditions on sort of, but this will be sort of Friday or Saturday that he might be setting that up. They just don't look favourable. I mean, Dougal crossed the Thames estuary with a huge tailwind, and it was very windy and very rough. The wind had been blowing northeasterly for quite a while, so there was quite a sea running, and there's loads of sandbanks in that Thames estuary. It's a really tough piece of navigation. There's lots of big waves that build up on these sandbanks. The waves had been barreling down the North Sea, and then they hit these shallows. They get huge. Dougal crossed in really tough conditions that I wouldn't have been at sea in that in any craft. So that was very impressive. But for Sebastian, it looks like it would probably be more like a headwind or slightly more western it than that. I just don't see him being able to do such a big crossing, which will cost him some time.
Well, I mean, that's, I guess, why he's got, a bit of a buffer now. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bad conditions over the next few days could eat into that buffer.
Next time we record, he will be on the south coast. And then I think things start to get interesting. He will then have to do nearly all of our major pinch points that we talked about. The tide races of the south coast. And, there's multiple up all the way up to the finish. He's got a lot to deal with.
Well, let's see.
Yeah.
So let's do a quick recap of the Nordhausen SUP race, which was last weekend. This was one of the Euro Tour events, the second to last one. It was an 11-kilometer race with flat conditions, not much, if any, wind, really warm. The favorite going into this race was last year's winner, Donato Friends from the Netherlands, and he very smoothly paddled to another victory here, ahead of fellow countryman Maximum Sierer and the German Bastian Grimm. So there was more of a race between positions 2 and 3 between Max and Bastian. They were pretty tight for most of the race, and Max took it on the finish line. Overall, not a great level of competition at the race this year on both the men's and women's side, missing, I think most of the top names who we saw racing in Spain and Greece earlier this year. We were supposed to see Bodie van Almen come over from the United States to race, but he ended up getting ill in transit, which sounded very unpleasant. And he is still hoping to make it to Namur next weekend, which is the next and final Euro Tour event in Belgium. So Namur, maybe I think Donato is racing that again. Maybe Bodie van Almen will be able to give him a little bit more of a challenge than Max and Bastian were. Let's see. Maybe we'll have some other, top names come in, try to challenge Donato. Otherwise, I think we're probably looking at another pretty smooth victory for the Dutchman.
Does Donato pick his races really well, or because you always seem to be mentioning it?
I think he is probably the paddler who has done the most racing this year by, I think, a margin. He has literally been racing almost every weekend for like 8 weeks straight. Wow. Essentially, like any of the major internationals with prize money. He's pretty much been there. There's maybe he's missed 1, maybe 2. He was supposed to be even at the GB SUP Nationals, a few weeks ago that I went to cover. He was supposed to be there, and then unfortunately he was ill, so he missed that one. But I don't think anyone else has raced, at least none of the elite racers, sort of the top level, has raced as much as he has It's a huge amount of racing. I think he has done well on the prize money. He's done really well in the rankings. It certainly seems to be paying off from that standpoint. But yeah, he's definitely, compared to the other top level racers, he has chosen to do virtually every race, whereas I think a lot of the other racers have been a bit more choosy about doing a little bit fewer races. It's got to be tough. I mean, it's a lot of time on the road, so I'm sure that takes a toll, which obviously isn't showing in his paddling.
Well, I mean, if he can have an easy race and he doesn't have to go flat out, then it's not too bad. It's just a Sunday long paddle, and it won't be too taxing.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, potentially, yeah, with these races, at least the last couple of weeks. Obviously, he was working really hard at the Spanish races and in Greece, which had a higher level of competition. But for these, as you say, if he doesn't have to work that hard, maybe it's not as taxing, and he is able to approach it more like kind of a decent training session, especially if the conditions aren't bad. And on the women's side, it was Oda Diestel who won the women's race at Nordhausen. So she was the German national champion in long distance last year, followed by Emma Freya Petersen, the national champion of Denmark. Again, a lower level of competition. We didn't really see any of the kind of like top level pro women's names at this race. I'm not sure if they're signed up for Namur next weekend either. Exciting for the women who were there to be able to, get onto the podium and get some of those major international wins, but not quite as competitive as some of the other racing. And there was a bit of a discussion on the Stand Up magazine page about why the turnout was lower and the level of competition. I think Mike Euchre thought maybe there should have been more paddlers from the German SUP community. Looking at these races last year, we did see a higher level of competition. There was a few paddlers who flew out from the United States, just a little bit more from that kind of like top tier pro racing crowd. Hard to say why we didn't see that as much this year. It was really, really busy in May and the first sort of week or so of June in terms of just those back-to-back SUP races for the pros. So I think there are probably people who flew out from outside of Europe for those races and then, didn't really want to kind of stick around for too much longer or fly there and fly back again. So yeah, kind of interesting and a little bit interesting to kind of end, for the Euro Tour to kind of end on a little bit of a quieter note, I think, than sort of what we saw a few weeks ago. But we'll see. Maybe there'll be some more names at Namur who we're not expecting. And then last weekend was also the crossing for CF, CF as in cystic fibrosis. So this was mostly stand-up paddleboarders. I think it is open to all sorts of craft, though. And it's an 80-mile open water crossing from Bimini in the Bahamas to Lake Worth, Florida. It's actually the biggest paddling fundraiser in the world. So since it was started in 2013, they've raised over $4 million for, awareness and support of cystic fibrosis patients. Cystic fibrosis, or CF, is a progressive genetic condition that often affects your lung function and ability to breathe, amongst other things. It's a real variety and diversity of paddlers from, relay teams, individuals, recreational, competitive, high-level athletes, and then people who actually have cystic fibrosis who are out there doing an 80-mile crossing. Really, really cool. I think that adds, a really meaningful element to a race that a lot of people, I think, already find pretty cool. It looks like I think there was a storm that swept in during the race this year, unfortunately, and conditions were pretty challenging with 4 to 6 foot waves at times during the race and teams getting pulled off the water because of those conditions in the storm, which is too bad. One of the teams I was following for this, so Lindsay Tilton, who has the women's SUP records for the Alabama 650 and last paddler standing. She's one of the top women's SUP ultra racers. She was racing with Riley Walker, who has cystic fibrosis, And Riley was aiming to become the first woman with CF to paddle the full 80-mile crossing. Really, really exciting goal. And unfortunately, between the weather, those conditions, and then it sounded like they both suffered from pretty severe bouts of illness that were different but intense and very bad. They unfortunately were not able to make it. So I think that was disappointing. But I expect, Lindsay talks a lot about sort of mental health, mental fitness with her group Aloha Athletics, and I expect her to be back again to try again next year. And she's done the crossing before, so
cool. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, neat, different type of race, but it seems like they're doing a cool thing there. What about the Berg River Marathon, Billy?
Yeah, the Berg is coming up. It's on the 2nd to the 5th of July. For those of you who don't know, the Berg River Marathon is in South Africa. It's a 4-day stage race. Stage distances are roughly 62, 45, 75, and 56 kilometers. It's on moving water with some small drops, some rapids. But the main feature of the Berg, certainly for what I know the race for, is for getting lost. I mean, you can take multiple different routes down the river, and you don't always know where you're going. If you're an international paddler going there, it can be really tricky. So even the top guys will struggle. And actually this year, particularly, you could end up finding dead ends in certain ways. It's really dependent on river levels. And this year, they're actually really worried about a lack of rain. So they're really hoping that the river levels are going to pick up. They've got some downed trees that they might have to cut short some of the stages. I think stage 2 might be shortened. But yeah, there is a real risk that you will paddle down one sort of branch of a river and find yourself in a dead end. And, that's something really the winner. In England, you're not too familiar with that, really, are you? And probably in many rivers in Europe, the river is the river. But there's so many different ways that this river flows. And you're going to need some luck and some good local knowledge. But there's plenty of that in Hank McGregor, who is aiming for his 14th Berg win. Looking to stop him is last year's winner, Tom Lovemore. So that could be a serious fight there for the men's title. The women's category is looking really tight. Last year's runner-up, Nuria Dill, she just won the last final warm-up race from Gouda to Bridgetown. She convincingly beat 3-time Berg winner Bianca Bevitt by 11 minutes, with last year's Berg winner Stephanie van der Heide in 3rd place. However, there's some big names arriving who didn't do the warm-up races. Jenna Nesbitt, Nix Burkett, Christy Shrimpton, and Pips McGregor, who have all been mentioned on this podcast multiple times, are all going to join them. Pips McGregor is trying to win her first Berg, but it could be any one of those 4 for my bets to win this race.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like it'll be some really good racing. I bet those could be some tight results.
Yeah, tight results. You get big groups going down, and it could be down to a sprint at the end of each stage.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be really fun. And different winners of different stages too always kind of adds excitement and strategy too.
Yeah.
I bet you're right. I bet those top women will kind of go down together and then see how long they can stay together.
If I'm gonna go with Nix Burkett for the win of that, and Hank will, I think, beat Tom Lovemore.
Let's see.
So there we go. There's my money.
Sounds good. We also have the Yukon River Quest going on right now. So making marathons look short.
Yeah, the Yukon's crazy, isn't it? So I had a little bit of confusion over this, and there are multiple Yukon River races. And this is the River Quest, which is the 444-mile race. which starts today.
Yes. So at 5 p.m. British time, which will be, I believe, early in the morning in the Yukon. I think that's correct. They do have GPS trackers, so we'll include a link so you can dot watch this race for the next few days. And it's just going to be absolutely epic. It looks like there's about 100 participants entered, different types of craft. We've got some canoeists, kayakers, stand-up paddleboarders. We've got a good team in canoe from the UK, which is the Green Machine. So I will be probably a little bit biased and rooting for them to win. And I know a few of them have done, they did the Yukon River Quest a few years ago, including, I think Richard Parrott and Tor Harley both did. And then I think a couple of the other guys are new. And in stand-up paddleboarding, we've also got Craig Sawyer. I think a lot of Brits tend to go over for this race. It's just become a bit of a thing. I was supposed to do it in 2020, and it is still on my bucket list. But yeah, Craig Sawyer raced the Yukon 1000 and made a documentary about it, which is a great watch. We'll include a link to that too. I think it's, if you just search, Yukon 1000 documentary, really neat watch. So that is the more than double the distance of this one. That's the one that's more kind of like a wilderness camping / canoe race, versus this one is a little bit more racy. There's only 2 mandatory stops, I think, for 4 and 6 hours each. And it only lasts over a few days. The other challenge with this race is that they have had wildfires in the area, I believe, recently, and that was a big challenge. I think it was last year as well, which is not actually the biggest hazard for the paddlers because they're, in the middle of a massive, massive river. And so the wildfires don't really present direct danger to them usually. And they have to, I think, sometimes they are required to be prepared with sort of masks and, protective gear for their airways. Because the smoke is the biggest risk there. But that, it could be a challenge this year too. I think hopefully those have cleared up by the point that the race is running now.
Yeah, that's bears, wildfires.
Yeah, bears, wildfires, rapids, hallucinations. Those are all kind of the hallmarks of a Yukon.
Yeah.
Well, this takes us to the warm down. There was a couple other tidbits that we wanted to talk about. Billy, what do you want to start with?
I liked the blade discussion size that Ivan Lawler put on a Facebook group called Surfski Kayak, and there's often a blade discussion size, a blade size discussion on this group because there is a guy from California who likes people to paddle or suggests people paddle absolutely huge blades. And Ivan often chirps in saying, no, you should paddle a smaller blade than that. But Ivan currently has his girls, which he's being wildly successful coaching at Elmbridge, paddling some really small blades. I pitched in, can't resist avoiding an argument on Facebook. I pitched in with a picture of Hamish Lovemore and Yuli Hart from the recent sprint race in Italy. Yuli is paddling some pretty sizable blades, and Hamish has got his 740s in his hand. And you can really see the difference in blade size on that picture. That was quite an interesting discussion. If anyone is curious about what blade size to use, go and have a look at that.
Yeah. As soon as I saw that post, I was like, Billy's about to be in the mix here. Maybe one of the takeaways is just like there's not one right answer for everyone, right? Like if Hamish is out there with small blades and Yuli is out there with big blades and they're both, putting down pretty top times. I guess it also says small blades are not wrong.
My opinion are if you are really good, if you have a really nice technique and you grab a water well, you can paddle with small blade size and it doesn't have a detrimental effect. I've found that when I try to go fast with small blades, I don't grab the water effectively enough because I don't paddle nice enough. And I need to cheat with a bigger blade to get the speed. But if I could paddle nicer, I would, and by nicer, I mean with a nicer technique, I would paddle with a smaller blade.
I love that take. What about the Apex kayak? This we thought was kind of interesting, talking about sort of equipment. A new like purpose designed marathon kayak is launching.
Yeah. The main feature being the bulkhead with the draining holes. I mean, they are essentially just holes in the hull, aren't they, with a small cover?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the main difference. There's a big blurb about the boat being purpose designed for marathon, not a sprint boat just used for marathon. But I'm not. I didn't really see much in the hull design to sort of, back that up massively. But apart from this draining cockpit.
Yeah, it looks interesting. Some good marketing, I think, that they're doing about it, but we haven't really seen it in action yet.
Yeah.
And then there was a new record that we wanted to talk about, or I guess a set record, right, on the Rhine River.
Yeah, I found this on Facebook. Erika Jand from Lithuania just completed the complete distance of the River Rhine. Yeah, she is the first woman to kayak the length of the Rhine. And that was a cool little trip, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, to solo kayak it, I think. So I'm not sure if others have gone down potentially as part of a group or in a tandem. But yeah, she said that she's the first to solo kayak the entire length of the Rhine, which is the second longest river in Europe after the Danube. So yeah, as you say, from Switzerland, the southeastern Swiss Alps to, she would have finished somewhere in Rotterdam.
Yeah, she said she tried to get to the sea, but you're not allowed through Hook of Holland and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, what made this quite interesting is she's really not a kayaker, and well done to her.
Yeah, and the footage is just beautiful. I think it definitely made me want to paddle the Rhine because it just looks like an absolutely stunning river. And I think that's it for this week. Thank you for tuning in. Please do subscribe.
You're not going to talk about the massive win on Wednesday night in Amersfoort. There was a huge 11K race last Wednesday in Amersfoort, the Netherlands. International field, paddlers from all over. I need to look up the results, but I took the K1 win there. Big K1 win.
Wow.
Yeah.
Billy, that's massive. Yeah. What about, were you the fastest boat overall?
No. I did get beaten by a K2. But I was the first K1.
We're gonna leave it there. How old was the?
The driver of the K2 was a 12-year-old boy. Yeah. So no, actually, we should be mentioning Milo van Barkel and Joop van Barkel, who has been mentioned on the podcast, I think, before. Milo is a very cool kid. I mean, he was driving the K2 really well. He sups, he foils, and he kayaks.
Yeah, no, it is really impressive. And Joop is, of course, a very impressive paddler too. I think we talked about him, his results from the Lake Rocks Festival in Austria a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, pretty cool. Father-son K2. 12 is really young. And that's really impressive from Milo, and to also be multidisciplinary at that age and to be able to race at such a high level in stand-up paddleboarding. I think he did really well at the Lake Rocks too. The kids who are beating him are at least 3 years older. So not only for the fact that he managed to beat you with his dad in K2, Billy, but we'll be watching out for Milo van Barkel in the future. And until next time, see you on the water.
See you on the water.